All right, hi everybody, and welcome to Big Picture History, Ancient Rome in One Lesson. My name is Mr. Powell. As most of you know, I'm the creator and teacher of History at Our House, an online homeschooling curriculum for students from 2nd to 12th grade. And I created this Big Picture History series to introduce you to various topics across the spectrum of things that interest us in the past, but also to show you a different way of looking at them. Right? The big picture history approach is to find that connection between the past and the present, rather than merely to study the past as an end in itself. We live in the present. We want information that will help us to navigate through our world. So the challenge is to find the stuff from the past among the plethora of options that we have for learning, meaning the plethora means, right, way too much information for us to handle in the past. And so in that plethora, which has led to the rise of this wonderful world that we live in with all of this diversity and complexity and interconnection and everything, right? The question arises, where do ancient civilizations fit, right? Is that still something that we should bother with in modern times? We don't live in ancient times. And so is there a good reason for us to bother with things that happened thousands of years ago to people that lived in a much more primitive way than we do? Is that information that is worth pursuing at this time? If you've been with me for other big picture histories, you know my general answer to that question is absolutely. There is an awareness that comes and a value that comes with being aware of ancient civilizations and the struggles that they had and what they were doing. And that awareness extends even to what we would call archaic cultures, such as ancient Egypt or ancient Mesopotamia and Persia, civilizations whose values we really do not embody anymore and that we would not want to embody anymore. Even then, we are learning about our fellow human beings and the challenge of social life and building of civilization. So even then there's a value. But of course today here we are interested in Rome. And when we get to Greece and Rome, there's something else happening altogether. There is truly a dimension to the study of these ancient civilizations that sets them apart. I refer to Egypt and Mesopotamia and Persia as archaic civilizations. The term archaic refers to that which is ancient and obsolete. Archaic refers to the idea that things are gone and it doesn't matter, and we wouldn't want them to be back. The term classical refers to the civilizations of Greece and Rome, and that is the term that is best used to distinguish these civilizations from the archaic ones. And classical also means ancient, but it has a little extra dimension to it, and that is we still accept, follow, honor, in some cases treasure, the values or ideas or beliefs of the civilizations in question. So it's old, but it's still good. It's old, but we still value it. And that is what we see when we study ancient Greece, when we study ancient Rome. These two civilizations are both of them extinct, like the archaic ones from the ancient past. However, they have transmitted values to us that we continue to accept and to foster in our own time. And I've showed my students of ancient Greek history a painting that captures this fact, and I'm going to summon that painting once again in today's class in the context now of not why do we study ancient Greece, but why do we study ancient Rome? Because the answer is very much related. So does anybody remember here what this painting is? Or even if you don't remember, I mean, have you ever seen this painting? Do you know what the title of the painting is? So let's see here. Belle, go ahead.
Plato and Socrates.
Oh, okay. It is Plato and Aristotle are the main characters of the painting, but I was asking if you remember the title. The title. Luke, do you remember the title?
The School of Athens.
The School of Athens, precisely. And Athens was the most important city of Greece. Okay, but where is this painting? What city is it located in? It's a trick question. Nikolai.
Athens.
No. This is why study Rome. So now, is that enough of a leading question for you? Alex?
Rome.
It's in Rome. Okay, so why do we study Rome? Well, because this is a Roman artist, if you will, an Italian artist in the time called the Renaissance, looking back and treasuring the civilization of ancient Greece, so much that he's building a mural for the Pope, who was the leader of Christianity in Rome, in his palace called the Vatican, and building an homage, as we call it, meaning a kind of celebration of the contribution of the city of Athens to human civilization, and in particular, of course, the great thinkers Plato and Aristotle at the center of the painting. But the point here for today's lesson is the painting is in Rome. Painting is in Rome. And there's a reason why it's in Rome, not elsewhere. Because, as we're going to see today, Rome is the vessel through which Greek civilization traversed the distance between ancient times and us, which is a little bit, say, literary way of expressing it. Ancient Greek ideas passed through Roman civilization to get to us. So what happened? The Romans, as you've probably learned in my Greek history, right? The Romans conquered the Greeks. We'll revisit that fact today. And then learned from them and adopted their values. So we have philosophy, for instance. Plato and Aristotle are the great practitioners of that in ancient times, but then we have people like Marcus Aurelius and Cicero and others in Roman times, and they're also philosophers. And then we have great artists creating beautiful art in ancient Greece, and then we have the Romans copying their styles and adopting them and producing their own beautiful art. And then we have the Greeks, the historians, Thucydides and Herodotus, my personal heroes. And then we have the Romans, Livy and Tacitus and others copying them and doing the same thing. And then we have here two things that are kind of more, I would say, distinctively Roman, a very particular concept of freedom that comes to us from Rome that is unique. It's not adopted from Greece. So we're going to look at that story today, which is a big component of how the world that we live in came to be, because the founding fathers of the United States cited two civilizations above all as having an instructive value with regard to the politics of freedom. And they were Greece and Rome. They said, that's the most important part of all of history. In other words, what they were saying, because Thomas Jefferson once said, history is that knowledge most useful to us. He was saying ancient Roman history is one of the most useful things that anybody could ever know. At least that's how he felt about it. That's how I feel about it. Indeed, I feel very strongly that if we understand what America is today, and we want to appreciate really what it stands for uniquely, we have to also look back to Greece and Rome as the examples upon which the United States was built historically. So the Romans have given us a lot and shown us a lot. So let's get to that, because as I've said so many times in this course, right, these various classes of big picture history, history is not merely the study of the past. We are interested to know how our world came to be the way that it is. And we cannot know, not really clearly, not with sufficient understanding, if we don't include Rome. We can't. Because if we rely on understanding American history just by looking at the founding, we'll be missing a layer. The founding fathers themselves were not magicians. They didn't conjure American freedom out of nothing. They conjured it out of the historical examples of Greece and Rome, and a little bit of British history thrown in as well. All right, so that's why we're going to study Rome today, because the Romans are a crucial part of the classical world, the ancient world that we still treasure its creations, its values, its ideas, in particular, political freedom. All right, let's dive in. Eve, go ahead and turn off your camera and keep it off, please, because I'm going to be the only one on camera. And now let's talk about the rise of Rome, the arrival of Rome into history. Like every civilization, it starts off with kind of a prehistorical background that's very unclear and fuzzy. But then it starts to emerge, and we have a lot of fantastical stories concerning how Rome got started. The one that I think is worth mentioning here is embedded in the very logo, the very symbol of the city of Rome, which is here in the top left-hand corner. It's a legend. Is anybody familiar with it? It's a very unusual looking symbol here, right? How did the city of Rome get started, Grace? Go ahead.
There was a story that was told, which probably wasn't true, but
Yeah.
there were two twins, Romulus and Remulus, and they were raised by a wolf. And then
Yeah.
Romulus killed Remulus, and that's why it's called Rome.
A little bit slightly off, but Remus was his name. Remus and Romulus, yes. And yeah, there's a legend about how they were put in a little basket on the river, and then they were saved by a she-wolf. And then ever since, that has been the symbol of Rome, right? These little babies, twin brothers suckling at the she-wolf. This is the city of Rome. Look down here later on. The shield that's being carried by this character in the painting has the wolf and the babies right on it. You can find this symbol in so many different ways if you visit the city of Rome. The soccer team for the city has that as its emblem. It is emblematic of Rome. This is a painting of the triumph of Romulus, becoming the first legendary king. But, as Grace was saying, these stories aren't true. These stories are legends, right? These stories are fun, and they're quite evocative and exciting, but they are legends. Raphael, go ahead.
Oh, I accidentally put my hand on.
I see. Okay. So when do we get to something that has a little meat on the bone, something that historians are willing to take seriously as a story that is significant in the actual unfolding of events in Rome? Well, it begins very dramatically with the overthrow of monarchy. So in other words, Roman legend is all about kings, and it's all about the establishment of the city with regard to the story of Rome and fighting its neighbors and the kings and how they ruled, and some of them were tyrannical. And then finally, we get to a picture that seems to have some solidity. It's a little bit shaky as far as histories go. The early stories that we have in every civilization are a little bit shaky, but the theme is so potent, because Roman history begins with the rejection of the archaic form of government, the archaic model of government that you find everywhere else. China, India, Persia, Egypt, everywhere, including in Greece up to this point as well, including in Rome up to this point as well. Everybody was ruled by kings. It's the default. It's the default form of government for human beings, because it's really raw and basic and brutal. You get a bunch of people together, right? Who in a primitive society's gonna get to have his way? Who is going to get to be the leader of the group? Elijah, Sophia?
Whoever has all the money.
No, we don't have any money. This is ancient primitive times. There's no money. Who's going to be in charge in primitive times when you get a group of people together? Belle?
Whoever has the most power.
power, okay, that's a good word. It's very abstract, though. Whoever's got the biggest muscles and the biggest club and who can beat up everybody else and tell them what to do. Because primitive people, right, uncivilized early humans, this is where they are. They're in a state of nature and they desperately need some order, and they're going to contend over, whatever is available, and the strongest guys are going to win. So you end up with these tough guys, these chieftains, these tribal elders and men who are as powerful, right? These are the physical, powerful leaders of society. That's why we always start off with monarchy. You see, as tribes emerge and become early nations, that there's always this hierarchy, as we say, a kind of levels in society, and at the top, at the beginning of the story, it's always this military group, this group of powerful men that have the power to impose their will on everybody else. So it's very raw and basic that monarchy is, and that's the reason why everybody starts out that way. It's not civilized. It's an attempt to create an order, right? But it certainly is not very fulfilling for human beings to live in that type of society. So when we look back to ancient times, especially in Greece and Rome, that's why the excitement arises for me personally and for the founding fathers and others of us that appreciate what freedom is and how great it is. Why this story is exciting? Because the first thing that we see in Roman history is them getting rid of this, acknowledging, understanding that monarchy leads to tyranny, and trying to do something about it. Very exciting way for a culture to emerge in history and stake its claim to being worthy of our attention, isn't it? To say, look, we broke the mold. That was the first thing that we did. And this is just an amazing painting that symbolizes this rebellion against monarchy and the drama of it in Roman civilization. It happened circa 509 BC. Circa 509 BC, circa of course means around, approximately. Rome's leaders rebelled against the king to create the Roman Republic. And this is where the story takes on an incredibly dramatic turn. Don't read the chapter for a second and just look at the picture. Don't read that paragraph for a second, just look at the picture. There's a man brooding in the corner in front of a statue. And at the base of the statue, you can see, if you look closely, the wolf and the two boys. So again, it's a statue of the city of Rome, and he is there huddled against it. And then we see a woman with her two daughters, one of them having fainted, looking over behind the statue to something very ominous. What is it? Don't read the paragraph. What is it? It's an amazing painting. It gives me chills. Nikolai, go ahead.
Their dead king?
No, good guess. It doesn't say king anywhere. So be careful not to import knowledge into your art appreciation, right? Just say what you see. Eve?
I think it's just someone dead.
Okay, a body on a stretcher. It's a body on a stretcher being carried into the house, not out of. Notice that the procession is going into the house. And in front is another body on the back of this man and another set of men carrying a stretcher, which you can make out when you zoom in as well. So two dead bodies are being brought into their house. Why are the girls fainting? Why is the mom so upset? And why is the man, the bearded man, the father, brooding? This is some serious stuff. Because his name is Lucius Junius Brutus. He's one of the most famous men of the Roman Republic. When the Romans rebelled against their kings, they created a new form of government that had two leaders called consuls. And they were supposed to protect the laws of Rome. And Lucius Junius's sons, Lucius Junius Brutus's sons, were part of a conspiracy to bring back monarchy. And this proved to be a great tragedy because Brutus was one of the consuls, which means he was one of the leaders of Rome, and he learned that his sons were rebelling and trying to bring back the monarchy, and thus he had one of the most unenviable tasks of any ruler you could possibly imagine. What did he have to do? Well, here it is on the paragraph. Preventing the return of tyrannical monarchy, I'm going to get rid of that "of" because there was a typo, was the greatest priority of Roman leaders from this time forward, including the famous consul, Lucius Junius Brutus, who had to, oh boy, here comes the bad part, who had to condemn his own sons to death for conspiring to bring the king back to power. That's the drama of the Roman Republic and the power of the belief of the Romans in their new system of government that would guarantee people's freedoms. The consul had to condemn his own sons to death. Could you do it? I can't imagine the drama. Could you do it? Could you condemn your own son to death? He did, and he is considered one of the heroes of early Roman history, and this establishes the early pattern of Roman history, this incredible commitment to political freedom, and so that's the beginning of our story. Wow, what a start, because you don't get a start like this in almost any other story. Yeah. I mean, even Greek history doesn't have a start like this. I tell you, I think this is probably the most dramatic beginning you could possibly have to any story. And no wonder the founding fathers of the United States were so taken by the Romans and the example of their republican virtue, because this was their level of commitment to political freedom. Imagine the cost. So what followed here was this form of government that was unique to Rome. It had two of these characters called consuls. Now, they were in charge jointly, but they did not have the power of kings in a few different regards. I mean, in one regard, they were elected, first of all. So there was an element of voting, right? And there were two of them. So they always had to agree in order for anything to happen. And the whole point of it was to have one balance the other and make sure that he could not be a tyrant. And they would be walking around Rome with these bodyguards, carrying these axes and a bundle of rods called the fasces. And this is very symbolic. And the Romans really felt like they had achieved something very significant to avoid tyrannical monarchy. However, it wasn't perfect. It was a start. And there was some unfairness in the way that Rome worked, like pretty much every other early civilization. There were still the group at the top with Brutus and all these other characters known as aristocrats, or in Rome, they were called patricians. And this was kind of a hearkening back to their special status. To be a patrician meant that you had a pater. Who knows what a pater is? It's a Latin word, but we have a lot of modern words that kind of reflect that Latin root. Anybody know? Bethany, go ahead.
Father.
Father, very good, right. So a patrician was a son of a noble father. The patricians believed they had a right to be in charge of the laws. Only consuls could be patricians. Meanwhile, you've got kind of regular people, plebeians as they were called, right? And so they didn't have any right to participate in the laws. They were considered kind of lowly people. They didn't have any wealth. And so they were not allowed to participate in the making of the laws. So this was a little bit unfair, and so the plebeians, these commoners, felt like, well, they needed some protections. They didn't have any role in the making of the laws, and they felt like the patricians could abuse their power too easily. And so to protest the unfairness of the system, what the plebeians would do is they would secede. Now, does anybody know what secede means? Because that's a word from American history too, right? They would engage in a secession from the country. What's a secession? Belle, go ahead.
Never mind.
Okay. Elijah, Sophia?
It's kind of like a work strike. They'd all kind of just leave and wouldn't come back until the rulers agreed to what they wanted.
Very good. Yeah, a secession. I mean, American history has a secession, right? It leads to the Civil War. The South secedes. It is like a strike. It's not technically, it's not a strike, although it's similar in this case. But it's merely a part of a country trying to leave the rest of the country and form its own country. And so the plebeians said, we're not going to live in this city anymore unless we have some guarantees of our rights being protected. And so they had done this on a number of occasions. And finally, as a result of their protest, they were granted a written constitution. Something that definitely impacted the thinking of the founding fathers, right? Because the Constitution was a set of laws, and it was inscribed in 12 bronze tablets for all to see. You know how we say, it's not written in stone. Well, this was written in bronze. I mean, this was solid. The laws were unchanging, unchangeable. They were an objective set of laws. You could point to them and you could say, I know what the laws are. Here they are, these people sitting in the assembly in kind of a pardon me, a market square kind of in Rome, and you see the people considering the laws and thinking about them. Right? And having access to the laws. Now, having access to the laws as an individual in a free society is really crucial. In a free society, or truly in any society. And there are really two things that stem from knowing what the laws are. Right? Two really irreplaceable values that you have by knowing what the laws are. What would you say those are? What would be one obvious thing that's crucial about knowing the laws? What does it allow you to do as a citizen? Grace?
Not break them.
Not break them, right. Follow the laws. Be a lawful citizen, right? That would be the standard answer, absolutely. Okay, what would be another value of knowing the laws? Belle, go ahead.
People can't lie and say that the law or something other than it is.
Yes, absolutely true. So that's true. Avoiding oppression. Good answer. That's one too. I was thinking of another. Good one. Okay, what else? What if the laws are bad? There's a big difference between legal and right. And it's very important for every human being to be clear on that in their lives, right? Being legal and illegal is not the same thing as right or wrong. If the laws are good, they tend to go side by side. But there is such a thing as an unjust law. And therefore, how do you do the right thing if a law is unjust? It's an important moral issue. Belle?
When you break the law.
Maybe. That's the extreme end of it, right? What else can you do before you have to break it if you decide that's the only way to go, right? I mean, that can be the outcome. Nikolai?
Protest to get rid of it?
Sure. Or an act in whatever legal means, are available to you to get it changed, right? So knowing the laws, one of the key value to knowing the laws is being able to challenge it and being able to say, this is not right, and then be able to take the actions necessary to improve your society by having the laws changed. And then, Belle, you're absolutely right. If you get to the point where you cannot make the change, then the only right thing to do is to break the law. My favorite lawbreakers in all of history are the founding fathers, because that's exactly what they did. Every one of them, by signing the Declaration of Independence, was becoming a what? What? Elijah, Sophia?
A lawbreaker.
A lawbreaker, a criminal, a rebel. Yep. Awesome! So, I don't advocate that in every circumstance, so don't get me wrong. However, when you get to a situation where there's a choice between legal and there's nothing you can do and you got to do the right thing, then yes, you can end up in that case where you have to break the laws. Even seceding was in a way of protesting the laws, getting outside of the laws and getting them changed and getting them improved. Yeah, so this is something, the way that the Romans acted with regard to the law in general, they favored it. In general, they followed it. They wanted to enshrine it in an objective set of unchangeable laws. But on the other hand, they also responded to being in a legal society with a legal framework that was accessible to the citizens, where they could act to change it and improve it. And they did over time. Now, the types of improvements that they made to the laws are a little bit out of scope with regard to this history. If you want to learn some interesting examples, and there are some quite wonderful ones, of Roman history, stay tuned at the end of the class, because I'll tell you about advanced Roman history. That's the place to find out about that. But the basic structure and the basic virtue of Roman society was embedded here in its early character by the establishment of the Republic, and then the improvement on that Republic by the protests of the plebeians that resulted in improvements in especially the rise of its constitution, the laws of the 12 tables. But Roman society started to take a wrong turn not long after this. Sadly, the Romans had a really great, I'm going to say, first century and a half. That was about one of the best times, one of the best places you could have lived ever in ancient times, was to be in ancient Rome in the first century and a half or so. But then after that, things started to go awry. Now, they started to, as always in ancient times, people, neighbors that couldn't get along with each other were fighting wars, and the Romans would be involved in multiple wars with their fellow Italians, and they were able to conquer Rome, they were able to conquer all of Italy in such a way that they continued to stay true to their republican values, but this is always a great challenge. To have freedom at the same time as war is one tough equation, and most people don't manage it. And so that was indeed why the Founding Fathers created America, because they were protesting the erosion of freedom within the British Empire having just fought a 7 years global war, which was changing the way that it was acting towards its own citizens. It was reducing freedom. And the founders could process that, and they said, uh-oh, this is going in the direction of tyranny. Let's not go there, because that's what happens to everybody else, is the tyranny rises and pretty soon you are oppressed, and then it's even worse. So history is full of examples of free societies being ruined by war, which is quite an ominous thought. So the Romans got into this as well. And like I said, there's another thing that there's a lot of details here that can be studied. And if you get back to me in the advanced class together, I'll show you the big set of wars that they fought. But the key to all of history is not which other primitive peoples they conquered, but the fact that they conquered the Greeks along the way. So I'm going to skip past all of the detailed wars that the Romans fought, even though there were a lot of them. And there was quite an impressive set of wars they fought. The one that matters the most for history is not that the Romans wiped out some other people that were pretty much no more interesting than they were, but the fact that the Romans conquered the Greeks. And so this is a painting that I teach my students in my classes called History Through Art on OutSchool. It's a very dramatic painting with, as you can see, some women and their children and so on huddled next to the statue of the city. The city is Corinth in Greece, and the Roman commander is on horseback, and he is arriving and he's taking control of the city. The Romans conquered the Greeks. And we saw this in big picture Greek history. This was momentous for Greece. It represents the end of independent Greek culture. But for us, here in the present, the significance of the Roman conquest of Greece is that it represents the rise of the thing that was reborn in the Renaissance. Specifically, even though the root of it is Greek, the thing that was reborn in the Renaissance was a combined set of ideas and beliefs that is called Greco-Roman civilization. That's a key term. So Greco-Roman, hyphenated idea, two components, right? And the Romans were receiving the wisdom of the Greeks and adopting it and following it and copying it, and then were the ones that ended up transmitting it to us. So that's really crucial, because the Renaissance that comes later in history is only possible because of the widespread presence of Greco-Roman values and because of the size of the Roman Empire. So let's get to this Roman Empire and what it was like. Sadly, it was a very corrupt place. even before it technically became an empire, the people of Rome lost that republican character and their willingness to abide by good rules of conduct and moral laws and so on by conquering everybody else. And they conquered so many people. They were so successful as an empire that they had slaves in abundance in their empire. Another amazing painting I teach my students in history through art. And thus, they became incredibly corrupt. So there's no more good news with regard to Rome. The rest of our story is not so good, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry. Those first two anchor facts of Roman history that tell us about what the Romans contributed to our world, those are the good. That's the good part. The rest is negative. They conquered the Greeks. That's a mixed bag because they transmitted some positive things to us. But then after that, they began to embrace just horrible values and became very corrupt peoples. And those that wanted to try to restore the republic, those that were really desperate to try to make society better, struggling to improve the laws, but just not finding a way to do it, the more desperate they became, the more they became seduced by the idea that all you need is one great leader to make Rome great again and everything will be solved. And so generation after generation, as slavery began to grow in the Roman world, the Romans, more desperate year after year to find somebody to make their world better again, looked for leaders, desperately looking for commanding leaders who could fix the system because they couldn't do it themselves. They found themselves stuck in a society that could not be fixed. And that's why we have this character in Roman history that transforms the character of the whole story. His name is Julius Caesar. And he is the most famous person in Roman history by far. He comes into the story at a time when the Roman Republic had become so corrupt in its expansion of slavery and its conquest of other civilizations like Greece, that there was no turning back. And he was a conqueror. He was a general who conquered France, as it was called back then, Gaul, and decided to use his power to try to restore Rome to its former greatness, but in the sense of him being its emperor. So with all the power that he had in the year 49 BC, he marched his army into Rome to try to take over for himself and make himself the leader of the city, the emperor of the empire. And when he did that, he basically brought about the end of Rome. He said, as he crossed the stream called the Rubicon into Rome, he said, "Alia jacta est." Anybody know what that means? Famous phrase in history. He said, "The die is cast," right? And once it's cast, who knows what happens, right? And indeed, he was playing with the fate of the entire Roman world, and he tried to make himself the king, but did he succeed? Did he become the first? He's the most famous Roman in history, but did he become the first Roman emperor? Anybody know? Bethany?
Nope.
No, he failed. Why?
He got killed.
Yes, on the Ides of March, as we say, he was assassinated. This is part of a painting that illustrates that famous moment. So he was killed. And so he did not become the emperor, but that caused the absolute collapse of the Roman Republic, because what followed was a contest for power between various people who wanted to try to take over. And so Rome was never going to be the same. There really is, when I teach my students Roman history, I spend half of it, a good half of it, studying the Republic, because not enough people study that. The Founding Fathers did. Most people waste their time memorizing the order of the emperors, and this guy follows this guy, and Tiberius and Caligula and Claudius and this guy and that guy, and memorizing all that stuff, and it's of no consequence whatsoever, and it's really the most decrepit part of Roman history. When I teach it, I spend most of my time working on the Republic, and then I try to get through the Empire part as quick as I can because it's really awful. It's really awful, but there are some important things going on in the story of the Republic as well, because after Julius Caesar's failed bid to become the emperor, his nephew succeeds and does become the emperor, as is captured in this amazing painting by an artist named Jean-Léon Gérôme. And his name was Octavian, but he becomes the first Roman emperor known as Augustus. And Rome, for a time, seemed to come out of this kind of episode of a lot of violence quite well. Order was restored. There was a great emperor in charge. And we call this the Age of Augustus, from 27 BC to 14 AD. But the interesting thing about it, which this amazing artist has captured in his painting, is that, yes, Augustus has all the glory, and he's up here on the throne, and everybody is huddled around him, and the whole world revolves around the reign of the Roman emperor. But what features in the foreground in a warm pool of light that explains why the Age of Augustus starts BC and goes AD? That is really where the world changes, Grace.
The birth of Jesus Christ.
The birth of Jesus, exactly. So while it's going on, this amazing painting, because it captures the splendor of this era, and there are some negative things in the painting as well, but just the scope and size of the Age of Augustus is so wonderful in sort of a way, but meanwhile, much more humbly, but in the foreground, so that we don't miss it, right? Jesus is born, and then we have a transformation that's going to come about. The Roman Empire is not going to last. It's going to disappear. But Christianity continues to this day, right? So there's a fascinating kind of playoff of these two here in the painting. And that really is what's going on in the Age of Augustus. Yes, the first Roman emperor, who wants everybody to think he's a god, by the way, and celebrated as a god later. And then we have Jesus as well. So we have competing beliefs arising within the Roman Empire. And the Roman one's going to lose. The Roman one is going to lose. So the Roman Empire will continue to grow, and that's a part of the story of how it plays the role that it does in transmitting Greco-Roman civilization to us. It gets to be this big, which is quite a sight. I mean, I sometimes show my students a map of the Roman Empire compared to the United States. There's a cool one. You can kind of Google it, and you can find a website that has this empire versus that one, kind of when you take the projections of the map and transpose one thing over top of the other. You can see this is very comparable in size. There's a big C in the middle, but it's very comparable in size to the entire United States. It was really gigantic. It stretched all the way from Mesopotamia over here, which is Iraq today, all the way across the Mediterranean world, North Africa, to Spain and France and Britain. So it's a massive empire. And so this is basically what we'd call its footprint, right? You know, literally when you step in the mud, that's the size of the impact that you have. Rome has this footprint in the world, if you will, and that has that plays a big role in terms of what it did to shape the society that we live in, the modern civilization we live in, because it's just the sheer scope of Roman activity and its ability to transmit values to us. So that's how big Rome got as an empire. Again, specific emperors, I could care less. We've said the most important thing. Augustus and Jesus at the same time. That is just such a potent symbol of the two, because the Romans are going to go by the wayside, but Christianity is going to survive. And the Romans are going to be undone by the presence of barbarians on the edge of their empire and the penetration of a group of barbarians called the Huns from Asia into their world, and the Roman world is going to fall in 476 AD. This is the painting that I use to symbolize that. And history is going to be, a completely new chapter is going to begin. The Roman world, in a way, good riddance by that point. Those Romans were so corrupt and awful. But unfortunately, what had to happen as a result was a dark age, because the characters that replaced the Romans certainly were not as civilized, and it took them a long time to build up a new civilization, which eventually did experience the Renaissance and did enact the Age of Discovery and brought all of these classical things to America. And we have this modern world that we live in over here as well as a result. So there's how Rome kind of contributes to the society that we live in, the civilization of our modern times. It's a place that had some very important examples of early peoples fighting for their freedom, and yet, sadly, also mainly a place that spent a lot of its time and energy and was corrupted thereby, conquering other people until finally they couldn't hold their own. So that's how Rome fits. Ancient Rome fits into our world in an anchor fact sense, right? In terms of a framework, a big picture framework of history. That's where Rome fits. So that's, like I said, and as I say at the end of all my big picture histories, that's the beginning for us all. So I'll be happy to send you a recording of this class. I'll be happy to send you a timeline of this, so you can print it out and look at it and think about it. And then, of course, the question is, where do we go from here? So hopefully you're interested in more. The Romans are worthy of more attention for sure, and there are a lot of great options. I do an advanced class on OutSchool as a follow-up to every single one of these. So look for that. The Advanced History of Rome will be coming. I don't know if I'll do it in the next month or so, but it's coming. And then, of course, the real deal is History at Our House. If you want to study ancient history in detail and learn it well, this is the product that I have to offer you. It's a curriculum. It's not a class. It's a curriculum, so it really teaches you the whole story. And it especially focuses on the connection between the ancient world and the modern world, which you don't find anywhere else. So that's my suggestion to you. And finally, one other thing to mention, if you like the live class, I'm teaching live classes right now as part of my History at Our House curriculum. I'm teaching European history. So that's actually a pretty logical place to go from here, because we just studied Rome and we just got to the fall of Rome. So perfect time to pick up and switch over to the story of Europe and the European barbarians building up a new world. So let me know if you want to join me for that. That would be a great opportunity. I don't have a lot of spaces left in that, but I do have a few. All right, so thank you, everybody. This is the big picture history of ancient Rome. And so now I'll open it up to questions or comments. Questions about the material, questions about future learning options you may have, or any comments you may have as well are welcome. Nikolai, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi or bye?
Hi.
Hi, okay.
And bye.
All right, well, all right, let's have something else. That's hi and bye is fine. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Grace?
When the Romans took over Greek, is that when the Greek gods turned into Roman gods, or did they already have their own gods and then it just kind of merged?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, the Greek and the Roman gods, as most people know, they tend to have kind of parallel pantheons where the gods are the same, right? So Zeus is Jupiter and Aphrodite is Venus and so on, right? So yeah, they're all very much the same. And I'm not sure that anybody really knows. I don't think we have a history of Roman and Greek religion that would allow us to know for sure. I'm pretty sure that they were parallel developments, and there were Greek colonies in Italy, and so I can teach you about that in the advanced Greek history as well. There were Greek colonies in Italy, so there were a lot of interactions between the Greeks and the Romans over time, and some influence between them. So I have to assume that it was just kind of a parallel thing where they developed very similar types of worship, and their pantheon kind of became a parallel set of gods. I don't think it was that one of them came up with it and then the other copied. But I might be wrong. As I say, we don't have a lot of detailed information on that. Okay, anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I hope to talk to you again. Bye for now.